Dale lives here in Cesarea, Romania, and again I'm still got the cough and the throat irritation and this cold that I've had for a while. It's much better than what it was, but the cough and the scratchy throat just seems not to go away hardly. So bear with me. We've been getting through it, and we'll get through this one. I think we got down through, we're in Daniel chapter 6, and looking, I think we got through verse 11. And so, or verse 10 maybe, and we'll pick up with verse 11. And we'll see that Daniel had made up his mind that he was going to do just what he had been doing before. He wasn't out to make a show. He wasn't out to act in defiance. He was just doing his normal worship, and that was that he prayed 3 times a day with his windows open toward Jerusalem. And that goes back to Solomon's day when he prayed that and dedicated the temple. That people, when they prayed towards the temple there, God would hear and answer their prayer. And so that was Daniel's habit. That was his thing that he did 3 times a day. He opened his windows and prayed toward Jerusalem. And of course, these men knew that falsely accused him, or set up actually accused him correctly in a sense, because, but they couldn't find fault with him any other way that they could get to stick with the king. And so they set this thing up and talked the king into signing it. They lied. They did lie, saying that, well, we all agree. All the major men agreed. The high officials. Of course, Daniel didn't. He wasn't there, and so they lied about that and got the king to agree to it. That anyone that prayed to any god or any man, made any petition for the next 30 days, would be thrown into the den of lions. And so Daniel did as he always did. Went even after he knew what was signed and that the law had been written by the king. And so we'll see then he went to his place and he opened his windows and prayed. Whether he had any idea that these men might be spying him out, I don't know. But it says, then these men, that's exactly what they did, came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king, concerning the injunctions, O king, did not you sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man, then 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? And of course, he did. And so we go down to verse 13. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, he pays no attention to you, O king. This is similar language, if you remember back when we were talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego not bowing down to the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. The same thing happened with them, that these officials came and said, O king, these exiles, not your men, your servants here, but these people that brought from the exiles, they had a certain disdain. That's what this is. This is disdain, shows some disdain for the Jewish people. Oh, he's one of these exiles that from Judah, that you pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. It didn't fare quite as well with King Darius here as it did with Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage, and he did the furnace 7 times hotter than it's normally heated, and I'm sure it's as hot as they could get it. But we'll see here that Darius regretted right away. He saw what had been done. He'd been tricked. And these people had set Daniel up because he was thinking about putting Daniel, I guess, basically in command in the kingdom. He'd be able to. He set 3 people under him, and these 3 would be. Daniel would be the head of the 3, is what he was planning on doing, and that's the reason they set out to take care of Daniel and get him out of the way. So we see then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed. And like I say, much different from what Nebuchadnezzar did. And set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. But then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, they knew what the king was trying to do. Know, king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. And then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. And then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. You remember we're back as the last at the first part of the chapter. It says that Daniel, the king was thinking about setting Daniel over these others because an excellent spirit was found in him. So you can see that Darius had a lot of respect for Daniel here. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting and praying, and no diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. In other words, I don't know what traditional at night before the king goes to bed it happens. You see a lot of films and you read a lot of stories, and I suppose they're mostly based on historical stuff, but you know, there's usually some entertainment. What do we do today? We turn the TV on, or we get on the internet or on the phone or something, you know, in the evening as we finished up our work. And so I don't know, but it said no diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. And then at daybreak the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish, it says. And I'm, by the way, I'm using the English Standard Version here, and so if it's a little different than what you're looking at or used to, the king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? And then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. And then the king was exceedingly glad, and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. So there's a couple of things here that we see that God did take care of Daniel. But Daniel was going to the lion's den, whether God took care of him or not. But he trusted God that he would. And so that whatever happened to be, it'd be taken care of. And, you know, it's different, I'm sure, thoughts that people have, you know, to try to negate what the Word of God says. You know, some people maybe think the lions weren't hungry that night, or maybe they'd been well fed or something like that. That's the Bible specifically says, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me. Now, were the awesomeness of that angel just standing in front of those lions made him cower back, or whether the angel actually had closed their mouths with physically some way, I don't know, but their mouths were closed. They weren't going to try to touch Daniel. And so Daniel made it through the night, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he hadn't trusted in his God. And so the king commanded those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in places. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwelt in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. And I'll stop right there for a minute. We'll see what happened to those men. You know, God has a way of turning the tables on people that maliciously, like the words used here, and to go after God's people. You know, over in the book of Esther, there was a Mordecai that and Esther, and so and Haman all there, and so there was a gallows built. And so it ended up that the accuser was the one that ended up getting hung on his own gallows that he'd built there for his, what he thought, considered his enemies. And a similar situation here, yet there were differences. And so we see that Daniel, the tables are turned. These men were out to do harm to Daniel and get rid of him. We see the tables get turned, and that's what happens so many times. God, in His graciousness, now sometimes evil runs roughshod. There's no doubt about it. We see it over and over in this world. Doesn't always end up like this. Thank God sometimes it does. And God makes things right, and He will eventually. His will is going to be done. And as I said, one of the other things that I've talked about is the practical things that are in the book of Daniel. Just like Daniel making the determination that he's going to serve his God, that he's not going to let anything turn him from it. And that's what we need to do. These are examples we need to take up. We need to search our own hearts and see where we're at. And so Daniel made his decision, but then there's the sovereignty of God. And we'll see that in the following statement here as we close out the chapter here in just a couple of minutes. But the king commanded that these men were had turned against the king. He was wanting to set this Daniel up and be over the other high officials there. And they weren't going to have it because he was, I think because he was a Jew. Because that's one thing they pointed out, well, this captive from Judah. And so we'll see that the king, that was serious business. And as I said, this is 2019. And just getting ready to go into 2020. There's things going on in the United States right now. And we've got people that's trying to bring the government down. And they need to be dealt with. I'm not saying exactly like not throwing them into a den of lions. But whatever the truth turns out to be, people need to let the chips fall where they may. If it turns out the president's the one that's trying to destroy the Constitution, so be it. But if it turns out that all his accusers in this deep state, and if you don't think there's a deep state, that I don't know much to say to you. Every nation just about has that. The government is so big to rule these countries. Even here in Romania, when communism failed, they didn't do anything really to the communists. The people protested when they found out they'd stepped down from the government and then put other people in place, and they demanded that something be done with them. Well, they arrested them, and then the next day they rescinded everything, I think is my understanding, that they had did. And so nobody really ever, other than Ceausescu, him and his wife, and maybe his immediate family, I don't remember who all ended up being executed, but most of the tyrants in that group that ruled with him, they may be in jail. I don't know. And they were talking about freeing them here a while back and wiping the slate clean, I think. And so there's some other demonstrations just within the last couple of years. But, we're not getting into all that, except to say basically nothing was really done. Well, that's not the way it's usually done. And that's the way, in the United States, I'm afraid we've got a two-tiered justice system. Depends on who it is as to whether or not they face prosecution. It depends on what party you are, whether you are targeted or not, and how severe the punishment is. And so my prayer is that whoever is found out, that they'll be dealt with severely, the guilty. And may God take charge of that investigation that's ongoing right now. I'm not going. Most people know my thoughts on this, and so I'm not going to get into that. I'm just saying that whoever is really found out, may God direct and may God oversee in His sovereignty, as we talked about the sovereignty here. And as I mentioned before, it's we talk about His sovereignty. Sometimes His sovereignty is to let evil do its thing. It's as Nebuchadnezzar brought judgment on Jerusalem because of their sin. And we'll see later on in the book of Daniel, and it may be in another place or two, mostly in the book of Daniel, you'll see over in some of the latter chapters, you'll see that this evil person comes on the scene, and it says that nobody could stop them. They rule, and they just run roughshod over but the evil that they do, and nobody can stop them. A terror, holy terror to God's people, and people are trying to live right. But the good news is that in every case where it says that no man could stop them, they all came to their end at some point. And so it is that we pray that God brings to the end whoever's trying. It really is. It's trying to shred the Constitution, and I think it's very apparent. But let me go on right quickly. We've gone finish this last little bit up. So the king continues his proclamation here, very similar to what Nebuchadnezzar learned, and I'm sure this is what Daniel had already witnessed to Darius, and so Darius knew about. Daniel was put in a special place to be a ambassador from heaven, or for heaven, to represent the King of Glory before these mighty men here, these kings that ruled the earth. To be a direct witness to them. And he explained to them, and he was very open about telling them, about his God and the true God. And so we see that the king goes on and says, I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for He is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. That's what we saw, or in the second chapter, that Nebuchadnezzar learned, or was told. He didn't learn the lesson right then. It took him a couple times. But in His dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So here Darius, that looks to me like a good testimony that he found the God of Jehovah God. He didn't do wasn't as hard-headed as Nebuchadnezzar was. He comes out and says here in this first thing, He's the living God, enduring forever. The living God, not one of many. And so he recognized who God was, I'm convinced. And he makes that distinction. So Daniel prospered. Here it says that during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. We've talked about who this Darius really was before. They may have been Cyrus himself. And those that make an argument say that maybe this would be interpreted just a little different to read. And sometimes that can be a possibility. It could be that it could be interpreted during the reign of Darius, who was, Cyrus the Persian. I find that a little difficult to myself. I think I think it's more likely that he was the general that came forth. But there's again, we can speculate on these things. One of these days, if the archaeological evidence is not brought out, and God allows someone to find something about this Darius, then we get to heaven. We'll learn it. It's really, that's not the important thing. The important thing is who the God of heaven is and who we serve, and how we're going to have our hearts set that we are going to serve Him. We're not going to be turned away, and we're not going to let these little difficulties and little stump our toe, or we trip a little bit and say, "Oh, I'm not. I can't follow Him. It's just not worth it." Well, we were worth it to Him when He left heaven, came to earth as a babe, and then walked this earth, suffered and died. I talked about the cross, how difficult it was. It wasn't just the nails. It wasn't just the spear in His side. It wasn't just the crucifixion and hanging on the cross. For the first time in eternity, it says the Father turned His face away. And there was certain separation from the Father. He'd never experienced that before. It said, my God, why have thou forsaken me?" That, on top of all the physical sufferings, what made it worse than anything that anybody could ever experience. And so, what are we going to do? We let these little things sidetrack us? God help us. Make up your mind. Be a Daniel. Be a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But be a Daniel. Purpose in your heart. That's what you have to do. Purpose in your heart that you're going to follow Him. That you're going to do what's right, regardless of the situation. And thank God for Jesus Christ who came and died for us. Dale Little, Rescue American Ministries, Chestnudea, Romania.